Hello, genealogist. This is Craig with Just Genealogy. Seems like everything is just going my way. Can't seem to get my camera to work, but that's not going to stop me from moving forward. One of our subscribers brought to my attention that she couldn't find my Becoming a Professional Genealogist lecture on lecturing. And again, I blame COVID haze or COVID fog or whatever, because I was sure I had done this. But in looking, I can't find it. I have the funniest feeling that this is going to be the story of my life for the rest of my life. So although this says Becoming a Professional Genealogist number 7, it is actually what should have been number 5, the third leg, because I did 2 and then I started talking about the individual legs. So today we're going to talk about lecturing, the third leg. And I always considered lecturing to be the third leg because that was the stool that most reminded me of what a stool actually looked like. But that's probably neither here nor there. What is there, though, is the question, can you be a lecturer? And my answer to that is a resounding yes. If I can be a lecturer, you can be a lecturer. Now, I know this might be hard for some of you to believe who've known me for a very, very, very long time, but I used to be shy and retiring. In fact, I don't think I became an individual capable of being an extrovert until I was in my 20s. But that's probably neither here nor there. When I was in high school, wanted to be an Episcopal priest. So therefore, I knew I was going to have to get up in front of people every Sunday and give them a sermon. And lecturing can't be any different than a sermon, except it actually is. So I was never put off by the concept of standing up in front of people and talking. You might not be in that position. You may be in the position of, I can't stand up in front of people and talk. But you can. And all it really requires is practice and the will to do it. The other thing that we need to talk about is understanding the value of reuse, because doing a lecture one time is just not an economical use of your time. So where do you start? Well, I am not an individual who started with my local society. I'm an individual whose first lecture was at a national conference because somebody got sick. They needed somebody, and I pretty much got down on my hands and knees and begged for them to pick me. Since I was on the program committee, it always helps to be on the program committee. But I would recommend that you start with people you know. It's very easy for you to talk to people that you know, and they're not going to be embarrassed by you, and you should not be embarrassed by them. It could be that you could speak to your local APG chapter, because I'm assuming that all of you are now members of APG, or at least seriously contemplating it, or one of the 2 APG SIGs, the Writers Forum or the Forensic Forum. You can find someplace to talk. Once you've done the local society, you can then move up to the state society. And there are a couple of state societies that for years I was speaking at almost every annual event, one way or the other. I remember once years ago, probably 35 years ago, I gave a lecture to a state society, and it was the first time I'd ever spoken to that society. Yet I'd been a member of that society for many years. And 2 of the joint program chairs approached me on the break after the first lecture and said, "Do you have any other lectures?" I lectured to that state society for years, and I'm still lecturing to that state society and other state societies with regularity. But I worked my way up into them. You want to work your way up the chain, especially if you suffer from nervousness in front of people. That's not to say that I have not been nervous in front of certain people And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's talk about preparation for a moment. There are three kinds of people who lecture. There are people who memorize their lectures, and they are like, in my mind anyway, magazine salesmen who can be put off their lecture just by the strange question in the middle of the lecture. Those people who memorize their lectures don't tend to allow questions in the middle of their lectures. There are some people who work from a script and you can watch the paper flip as they're talking. Now, these may be notes, or they may have put their entire lecture out and they are now reading it to you. Now, in some places outside of the genealogy world, reading a paper is acceptable behavior. My experience is in the genealogical world, having notes is fine, but reading your paper is not. There are some people like myself who use their slides to guide them in the conversation, because that's what I'm having with you when I'm lecturing. Maybe it may seem to be a one-sided conversation for the longest time, but basically I'm just conversing with you. I'm really not, quote, lecturing you. I'm having a conversation with you, and you just have to be quiet for 45 minutes or so. Although many times I allow questions in the middle of my talks, although in the webinar environment, that doesn't work as well as you might think. My recommendation is that if you're nervous, you might have a script, don't read it, use it as a guideline, but grow into the space where you're using your slides to guide yourself in the conversation. And don't forget, with tools like PowerPoint and other presentation software, you have the opportunity to add notes. Whenever I give a talk in PowerPoint, I am talking to you from presenter mode, although that's not what you see. So if I have something that I must mention that's not on the slide, it might be in my notes. I'll be honest with you, usually my notes field is absolutely empty, but that's just me, and I've been doing this a very long time. The other thing that you have to understand about lecturing is the value of reuse. Let me give you an example. So I created a World War I general research lecture. I gave that lecture in 2018 to the Kansas City Professional Management Conference. In 2020, I gave the same lecture to the BYU Family History Club with some modification. So I've tailored this single World War I lecture, where I've now given it probably at least 10, if not a dozen times, to individual state societies, with the lecture being unique to their state. So in other words, I substituted the pieces that belong to the state that I was lecturing to for what I did the last time. So it's still a different talk. The division patches are different. What the individual divisions did were different. The tracing someone from camp to Europe and back again may be different depending on the circumstances. But there was this World War I lecture. Now, I also was able to expand on pieces of that World War I lecture, so I ended up with 7 more lectures that deal with specific components of World War I. For example, traveling to Europe, where I talk about ship manifests for an hour, or traveling back from Europe, where I talk about ship manifests for a different hour. But those are 2 different topics, and the information comes from pretty much 2 different places in regards to how the government handled it, what kinds of records they created, and those kind of things. I have a talk on divisions. For example, where I talk about all the division patches and medals and how the divisions are, what they're composed of, brigades, infantry regiments, sanitary trains, those kind of things. So you can take a general lecture and make it into something that is a lot more specific, and that's part of reuse. So learn to expand a lecture into the opportunity for multiple lectures. Then I wrote an article for NGS Magazine on how to research a World War I soldier. Always try to write articles for NGS Magazine. Great exposure. and people will ask you to lecture. And I imagine that there's a book in my future that deals with how to research a World War I soldier. But again, it's along with the one on the Hessians, the one on the Loyalists, the one on the Revolutionary War, the one on the, never mind. So what is the number one thing that you have to do in order to be a lecturer? Actually, it's very simple. It's called propose. You have to be able to propose when a call for papers is received. There's several places out there that will let you know about what can be proposed. TAMI is one of them. Genealogical Speakers Guild is one of them. There, you want to always be cognizant of what calls for papers exist so that you can propose. Always propose the maximum number of talks allowed. In other words, if they allow 4, propose 4. If they allow 9, propose 9. Always fully propose, because you want them to pick as many of your lectures as possible. Now, one of the sneaky things that I do is I will always propose 1 or 2 lectures that I've never given before, probably don't know anything about, because for me, it's a learning experience, and I'll put my heart, mind, and soul into putting something together that's worthy of my name and my reputation. But it gives me an impetus to continue to learn. In other words, you just don't want to propose the same old things all the time. Although I've been known to do that, it doesn't work out well. You also have to answer the question of, do you need more equipment? What are program chairs looking for? And exactly what are the economics of lecturing? Do I need more equipment? Well, we live in a world where not everybody provides you with a digital projector. So you need to have a digital projector. But then along with a digital projector comes stuff, and it never fails. Nothing is worse than not showing up with your digital projector when the contract says you need to bring it. You don't know how many times I've lent my digital projector to someone because a program chair has come to me and said, will you lend your digital projector to this person? They didn't bring theirs. They didn't know they had to have one, even though they signed a contract that said they knew that. Nothing is worse than showing up with your digital projector without the correct adapter to make it work in regards to how it connects to things. Is it HDMI? Is it something else? Mostly everything now is HDMI, but there was a time when it was iffy as to what kind of adapter you actually needed. I traveled with several. Then the other thing is, nothing is worse than leaving your digital advancer, your pointer, on the podium, on the lectern when you leave. You don't know how many pointers I've left behind. You want to become proficient in the tools of your trade. You want to be able to set things up in almost no time at all. In fact, I'm generally talking to people as I'm setting things up. I'm asking questions, I'm answering questions, because setting things up is boring for me. So I have gotten to the point where I just know how to do it with my machine. I do it and I move right along. So the most important thing you can do, though, when it's all said and done, is remember to leave the room with all your equipment and accessories, and ask yourself the question, how many pointers are you willing to leave behind? Now, there's also the issue of, what do program chairs look for? And I talked to you before about what do institute people look for. Well, it's not really much different. Every program chair is unique. It absolutely helps if they recognize your name. It helps if they know you personally. It helps that they've heard you speak before. If they've never heard you speak, they're leery. And then they want to have samples of your speaking and all that kind of stuff. So you want to initially start out in places where you're known to the program chair, local society. You want to build your reputation so that program chairs from other places will know of you. Now, because the program chair knows you does not mean you'll be selected. Trust me. There have been many times where I've not been selected, where I've known the program chair for 30 years. But that's just how the cookie crumbles. Remember, the program chairs are interested in two things. They're interested in who will put people in the seats, whether it be in person, whether it be hybrid, whether it be webinar. They want people in the seats. They don't want to spend money on you if you attract 5 people. The smallest number of people that I've ever talked to is 2. The next after that was 8, but there was a hurricane going on. They're also looking for people who will add to the reputation of their society. Imagine your society saying, we got Elizabeth Shown Mills to come and talk. We got Tom Jones to come and talk. That is so much better than saying, we got Craig Scott to come and talk. Trust me when I say that. So they look for people who will add to the reputation of their society. They look for mainstays also. You want to become a mainstay. So let's talk about the economics of all this. Probably in my mind, reuse is the most important aspect of lecturing because it takes so long to prepare a lecture. It takes an almost infinite number of hours to properly prepare a lecture. Part of the problem is that if you're creating a lecture about something you know nothing about, that takes longer because you have to learn. But if it's something you only know a little bit about, you'll learn very quickly how much you don't know as you put the lecture together. No one can afford to do one-offs. I have done one-offs. They're not pleasant. But the solution for me is I just treat it as I just treat it as a learning experience, but recognize it's going to eat a whole bunch of time to create. It could take you anywhere from 40 to 80 hours to create a lecture. You want to give that lecture 20 times, but you want to make sure it's different each time, because recognize you are amateurizing that 40 to 80 hours out over all of those lectures. So I'm very happy with some of the lectures that I've given 20 times, and people have sat through them more than once and haven't gotten the feeling that they got the same lecture they got the last time. Part of that is because I lecture to my slides. I don't have a script. I really don't have notes per se. I lecture to my slides, so it's different each time. And there may be nuanced information that I'm providing one time that I either haven't provided before or it's just different. So you want to make sure it's different each time. And lastly, I want to share something that I consider to be the clue. You know when you've arrived. When you look in the back of the room, you see someone that makes you nervous, then you know you're in a good spot. Because those people who make you nervous, you know, those special people who we all learn from, when they're in the back of the room and they're listening to you, they came to hear you. Now, they may have a variety of different reasons for coming to hear you. One might be they just want to hear you. The other one might be that they're evaluating you to be an instructor at an institute. I can remember the first time I ever saw Elizabeth Shown Mills in the back of the room when I was lecturing. It scared the bejeebus out of me. It just made me more nervous than you can imagine. But at another lecture, I looked in the back of the room and she was there again. Well, if they come back, you passed the first test. Now your job is to finish the second, third, fourth, and fifth test. By the time she had sat in the back of the room 6 times over our lifetime together, I wasn't nervous anymore. And it doesn't bother me anymore when people of great reputation in genealogy show up for my lectures. It just doesn't anymore. Thank goodness. But remember that I've been doing it for a long time. You too can do it for a long time. The most important thing that you can do is to propose a lecture. The next most important thing that you can do is to give that lecture very appropriately so that it's well received by those individuals who are listening to you, so they chatter about what a good time they had and how much they learned. And program chairs will hear that, and you too will be on the road to lecturing. So this has been Craig with Just Genealogy, finally doing that third leg and finishing off the series of this part, not the series, but this part of becoming a professional genealogist. And thanks to that subscriber for bringing it to my attention that I had somehow not done it. And here it is. It's done. I'll get it wrapped up, and I will see you tomorrow.